Abigail saw the panic in the young man's eyes. He was terrified, and for good reason. Grave danger loomed at that very moment. 400 warriors were on their approach, ready to eliminate every male in Abigail's husband's family. Why? And what could one woman do against an army?
History is meaningful if we learn from it. Technology changed a lot, but the basic human feelings and needs are the same. This episode part of a series which speaks about people who are mentioned in the Bible. Thanks for all who would like to support this channel. Please, if you can subscribe, or give a like, or a meaningful comment. In the description you may find other opportunities to support this channel. Enjoy.
Everything had began with Nabal. As usual, he had acted harshly and arrogantly. He'd insulted the wrong man this time, the revered commander of a devoted and well-trained band of warriors. Now, one of Nabal's young workers, possibly a shepherd, approached Abigail, hoping that she can do something to save them. But what could a woman accomplish in the face of an army? Abigail and Nabal were not a good match. Nabal could not have chosen a better wife, whilst Abigail was married to the worst possible chevalier. True, the man was wealthy. As a result, he regarded himself as immensely important, but how did others perceive him? It's impossible to imagine a Bible character that is spoken about with such disrespect. His name literally means, stupid, or, senseless. Was he given this name by his parents at birth, or was it a nickname he picked up later? Anyway, he lived up to this name. His practices were severe and unpleasant. He was universally feared and despised as a bully and an alcoholic. Abigail was the opposite of Nabal. My father has made himself joyful, her name implies. Many fathers are happy at their beautiful daughters, but a wise parent is even more pleased to recognize his child's inner beauty. Too frequently, a person blessed with external beauty overlooks the need of cultivating characteristics like intelligence and courage. But not Abigail. She is praised in the Bible for both her beauty and her attitude. Some would ask why such a bright young woman married such a terrible man. Remember that many Bible marriages were arranged. Even if it wasn't, parental consent was crucial. Is it possible that Abigail's parents favored, if not arranged, this marriage because of Nabal's money and prominence? Were they under any financial strain? We don't know, but in any case, Nabal's wealth did not qualify him as a suitable husband. She was married to Nabal for whatever reason, and she was determined to make the best of a situation. Nabal had just made Abigail's life much more difficult. It was none other than David who he had insulted. Samuel the prophet anointed this individual, indicating David as God's chosen to succeed Saul as king. David was hiding in the wilderness with his 600 devoted men, fleeing the envious and wicked King Saul. Nabal was from Maon, but he worked and most likely owned land in Carmel. Those settlements were set in grassy uplands ideal for sheep farming, and Nabal owned 3,000 of them. But there was wild country all around. The immense wilderness of Paran stretched to the south. The approach to the Salt Sea from the east passed through bleak wastelands dotted with ravines and caverns. David and his troops must have battled to survive in these areas, foraging for food and facing many hardships. They frequently came across young boys working as shepherds for the affluent Nabal. What was the treatment of the shepherds by those hard-working soldiers? It would have been simple for them to take a sheep time to time, but they refused. They were like a protective wall around Nabal's herds and slaves. On the contrary, shepherds and sheep faced numerous perils. Predators abound, and Israel's southern border is so close that foreign marauding bands and thieves frequently attack. Keeping all those soldiers fed in the bush must have been a huge task. So David dispatched 10 messengers to Nabal to seek assistance. David picked the right time. It was sheep-shearing season, which meant plenty of charity and feasting. David likewise chose his words carefully, employing polite terms and addresses. He also addressed himself as, "Your son David," maybe in recognition of Nabal's advanced age. What was Nabal's reaction? He was furious. The young man mentioned before recounted the situation to Abigail as he roared rebukes at them. Nabal, who was stingy with his bread, water, and butchered meat, grumbled loudly. He dismissed David as insignificant and compared him to a fugitive servant. Nabal's viewpoint could have been similar to Saul's, who despised David. David was enraged when the messengers returned with their findings. He said, "Gird on everyone his sword." David armed himself and led 400 soldiers to attack. He promised to eliminate every male in Nabal's family. However, how could Abigail preserve her family? In some ways, Abigail has already taken the first step toward redressing this awful mistake. Unlike her husband, she was willing to listen. "He is too much of a good-for-nothing fellow to speak to him," said the young servant about Nabal. Unfortunately, Nabal's sense of self-importance made him unwilling to listen. However, the young man recognized Abigail's abilities, which is no doubt why he contacted her with this issue. Abigail was quick to think and act. We read, "At once Abigail hastened." This time the verb, to hasten, appears 4 times in relation to this woman. She had something special prepared for David and his troops. Bread, wine, lambs, roasted grain, raisins, cakes, and fig cakes were all on the list. Abigail was clearly aware of her situation and in command of her domestic chores. She dispatched several of her slaves ahead with the provisions, then followed alone. However, we read, she told nothing to her husband Nabal. Abigail soon found herself in the company of David and his troops. She hastened once more, this time to dismount her donkey and prostrate herself before David. Then she poured out her heart for a long time, pleading for mercy on behalf of her husband and her family. What made her words so powerful? She accepted responsibility for the situation and begged David's forgiveness. She admitted that her husband was as irrational as his name represented, maybe implying that chastising such a guy would be beyond David's dignity. She affirmed her confidence in David as a king. She also advised David not to do anything that would bring him blood guilt or that would later become a cause for stumbling, implying a troubled conscience. What was David's reaction? "Blessed be the God of Israel, who has sent you this day to meet me," he said as he accepted Abigail's gift. "And may God reward your wisdom, and may God bless you for keeping me from committing blood guilt today." David congratulated her for coming so quickly to see him, and he admitted that she had saved him from blood guilt. He told her, "Go up in peace to your house," and humbly added, "I have listened to your voice." Abigail note the contrast between that faithful, caring man and the beast to whom she was married. Later Abigail came in to Nabal, we read. Yes, she returned to her husband, as determined as ever to do the best she could in her duty as his wife. She needed to inform him about the present she had given David and his guys. He was entitled to know. She also had to inform him of the threat that had been avoided before he learned of it elsewhere, to his even greater embarrassment. But she couldn't tell him right now. He was eating and drinking like a king. She waited till the wine's effect had worn off the next morning. He'd be sober enough to understand her, but he'd also be more dangerous in his rage. Despite this, she approached him and gave him the entire incident. She fully expected him to erupt in rage, even violence. Instead, he simply sat there, motionless. What was the man's problem? His heart stopped beating inside him, and he turned into a stone. He could have had a stroke, for example. However, he died around 10 days later. God struck Nabal, and he perished, the narrative says. Abigail's lengthy nightmare of a marriage came to an end with this. Aside from being free of a horrible marriage, Abigail had another gift. David sent messengers to propose marriage after learning of Nabal's death. "Here is your slave girl as a maidservant to wash the feet of my lord's servants," she said. Clearly, the idea of becoming David's bride had no effect on her. She even offered to serve his slaves. Then we read of her hastening once more, this time to prepare herself to see David. Abigail's life with David would not always be smooth. This was not a fairy tale ending. Ahinoam was already David's wife. And David was not yet king. There were challenges and difficulties ahead. Abigail realized that she had a spouse who respected her and protected her as she assisted and supported David along the path of life, finally bearing him a son. He even saved her from kidnappers on one occasion.